Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, we've got another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Kel-Tec Pmr-30, which is chambered in .22 Magnum. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't want to review this gun. Even though a lot of people have been asking for it, I just didn't want to do it, and you may be asking why. Well, it just didn't seem like a good candidate for a concealed carry weapon to me. It seemed large and awkward. It's an unusual caliber, which I tend to avoid for carry guns. And I've heard a lot of negative feedback about the quality and problems with the firearm, and it just seemed like a lot to overcome to be a concealed carry weapon. But after spending some time with this firearm, I can tell you that some of my opinions have changed. Was I wrong about the Pmr-30? Well, we're going to find out in just a minute. All right, once again, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. If this is your first time coming to the channel, well, welcome aboard. Thanks for being with us. If you're a returning viewer, thanks for your support. If you've been watching our videos and you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet and you like our content, please consider doing so. You can do that by hitting that little subscribe button in the lower part of your screen there, or you can scroll down below the video if you're on a mobile device. It helps us out a lot, and we do really appreciate it. So, Kel-Tec Pmr-30. Like I say, once again, I didn't originally want to look at this firearm at all, even though I've had a lot of people ask for it. But it was actually a colleague of mine and his level of enthusiasm toward this firearm that actually got me to turn this school of thought around. So, once again, this is a .22 Magnum. And as the name indicates, Pmr-30, it holds 30 rounds of .22 Magnum ammunition, which is a lot of firepower for any handgun. Now, we're going to go over all the specifications, of course, here in a minute, but we always like to start off by doing a little comparison here, and I'm going to break out one of the old standards to do this, and I've got a good reason for the one I'm going to choose. So, the Glock 19 makes its way out for these comparisons a lot, just because it is a good standard by which to measure a carry firearm. Glock 19 is kind of on the larger end of what I will carry on me, just because I prefer a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller. So I want you to take a look and pay close attention, because looking at the two, obviously the Kel-Tec is a lot larger, than the Glock 19. You can see it has a much bigger grip, has a much, thicker grip. But of course, we're talking about the .22 Magnum cartridge, and it is a much longer cartridge than a regular .22. And so you're going to have a lot of room that you need to manage that cartridge. So it's a very large grip. If you got big hands like me, it's not a problem, but if you had really small hands, this might not be as comfortable, and you can really see the difference between them. Now, obviously, as you look over the top, you can see that as far as width, it's going to be comparable in the holster. Of course, there's going to be a big difference as far as the height. You can see that the Kel-Tec obviously has got a larger grip, and has, of course, a much bigger magazine. Of course, this is strictly a carry comfort, comparison. That's why we do this. If you're used, for example, to carrying something like the 19, well then, in theory, to me, since the only thing you're really having to manage is a little bit more of the barrel and a little bit more grip, that's just something to think about. Now, the area where this really makes a difference as far as the weight. The Kel-Tec, majority of this gun is polymer. And this thing only weighs 14 ounces empty, which is absolutely incredible. If you feel this firearm in your hand, it just doesn't feel like anything at all. And even with the loaded magazine, it doesn't feel as heavy as most of my compact pistols, say in a 9mm or something of that degree. So that gives you a pretty good idea as far as size. And once again, I think that's important we make that comparison, because obviously its viability as a carry weapon is a pretty important part of this overview. All right, we're going to jump into the features section here, but of course, before we do, we want to take a moment and thank our friends over at Don's Weaponry for providing us this beautiful example of this Kel-Tec Pmr-30 for our tabletop review today. Don's Weaponry is a huge supporter of firearm safety and education, and we can't thank them enough. So, just kind of looking this thing over, as I said, once again, this is a gun that's made very much almost entirely of polymer. Of course, you've got your metal components on the inside where you have to have them, but there's a whole lot of plastic in this gun. As a result, as I said, this is a 14-ounce weapon, empty. And that makes a difference because whenever we talk about the carry portion of this, we're going to come back to the weight. But just kind of in no particular order, look at the top, we'll start with the sights. Well, it's got high visibility fiber optic sights. I like this. If a gun is going to come with something, you know, besides a white dot sight, this is really what I like to see. It doesn't matter necessarily, you know, white dot sight will get the job done, but I think that these fiber optic sights just show up so well, and so I'm really pleased to see that that's what comes standard. They also give you some spares to change these out if you so choose. Now, if you notice, it's also got some screws here at the top. That's because this will accept a optics mount as well, and people have tried different solutions for this. Kel-Tec recommends, I believe, you need to have an optic that weighs 2 ounces or less. The idea behind that being is you don't want too much additional weight on the slide or else it could malfunction. You know, obviously this is on a hybrid blowback system, and so you've only got a certain amount of energy coming from the cartridge to move this slide back, and so if you have too much additional weight, it can cause the weapon to malfunction. That's also a reason why you have to watch what kind of ammo you use in the gun. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the range, but it does matter. So, high-vis sights, optics mount capability. You've got a pretty nice accessory rail here, so if you want lights, lasers, that type of thing on your firearm, you can sure do it. You've got a pretty good size trigger guard, which is always a favorite of mine. As a guy with long fingers and big hands, I like being able to easily access that trigger there without having to kind of poke and hunt for it. You've got your slide release here. I'm going to go ahead and drop this magazine here and let you see, of course, that we are safe. We are clear. Obviously, there's nothing in there. And now that we have it clear, you can see that's that. The safety right here, this is a ambidextrous safety. It is a 1911 style safety, and just slide up and slide it right down there. The trigger is actually really good on this firearm. We're going to get into more of that when we talk about the range. Kel-Tec specs this as a 5-pound trigger. I got a little slightly different result, and we'll cover that more in the range section too. The grip is pretty wide. I kind of touched on this when we did the size comparison. Because of this 22 Magnum cartridge, you end up with a pretty wide grip just because of what your magazine has to do there. So for me, having a larger hand, this doesn't bother me at all. I'm extremely comfortable, holding this firearm either one-handed or in a traditional two-handed grip. But if you got smaller hands, it might not be as comfortable for you, and there's nothing that you can really do about it because there's nothing to change. There's no way to make this grip smaller. And of course, you do have this magazine release that is here on the back and bottom of the grip. Okay, so that's how that works. And of course, you've got this texturing, this kind of squared off looking waffle pattern on the sides. You don't have any texturing on the back or the front, but this is pretty good, pretty large. I don't really see where you would need anything else because the grip is so big. By the time you have your hands pressed on that pattern right there, you've got a pretty good grip on the firearm. And of course, you can see the screws all over where this is kind of, majority of it. Obviously, this is a two-piece where all this has been put together with these screws, and some people don't like that look, but at least you can see that it's pretty solidly assembled with all those screws going through. And that's going to be your kind of basic overview of the features on the Pmr-30. So when we talk about the range, there's a couple things else I'm going to bring up here. So when I first picked this up, I looked at it, and you know, I didn't have really any history on the PMR-30 at all. And when I first looked at it, I thought, yeah, just another striker-fired pistol. But it's actually not a striker-fired pistol. It does have an internal hammer. So keep that in mind. Not that it matters, but it is a internal hammer firearm. You've got a 4.4-inch barrel. And the reason I bring that up is because the .22 Magnum cartridge is extremely powerful. If you've shot regular .22 long rifle, but you've never shot .22 Magnum, the first time that you do, you're going to notice that it is a much, much more powerful cartridge. It's extremely loud. It's a high-velocity cartridge. And you'll find that the weapon is extremely accurate because you have a long barrel on the firearm and you're shooting a powerful cartridge, and just immediately very accurate from the very first shots. But once again, it's extremely loud, so make sure you use your ear protection. If you're outside, you've got your own, you know, property or your private range or something, don't shoot this without ear protection because you'll regret it. Now, talking about ammunition, you know, one of the things that one of the reasons I didn't want to look at this in the first place is I figured the .22 Magnum, like a lot of other exotic, if you will, cartridges, might be, you know, hard to get because, you know, there's been some challenges getting certain type of ammunition. I have to give hats off to CCI because they are one of the companies that's kind of keeping up, and I can still find ammo. There's some companies it seems like I can never find their ammo when I'm looking for it. But CCI is getting plenty of the .22 Magnum ammo out there so you can actually use it. Now, this is the 40 grain Maxi Mag. And the reason I bring this up is Kel-Tec specifically states that you shouldn't use ammo that is lighter bullet weight and less powerful, because you can get failure to feed. Obviously, the energy from the bullet, the gases from the bullet, you know, work with this blowback system to recycle your slide. And if you're using a 30 grain or 32 or 36, it's possible with all of those that you could have feeding problems. Some of the problems that I have researched that people have reported to me, I ended up finding out that they were using bullets that were lighter grain and less powerful than these 40 grain CCI. So that's something to keep in mind. If you have one of these and you have problems, that's something that you probably need to know. Now, when you're using this firearm, even with the right ammo, it seems like it has a little bit of a break-in period. Now, every gun, granted, is going to need some break-in time. But even using the CCI 40 grain bullets, it seemed like, yeah, there was an occasional failure to feed. And it was a simple matter of just recycling the slide and just keep firing. So the gun continued to work, but occasionally you'd have a round that wouldn't go in all the way. Now, I'm going to attempt to show you part of the design that might be responsible for part of that if we can get the right angle on it here. Looking down inside the chamber here, you've got if you can look really close there, you can see the barrel, and there's a little tiny lip. Most of the time you see a feed ramp. You've got just a tiny, tiny lip right there going into the barrel. Now, that's the design, but I think that because that is more of a blunt, small step, it may be possible that that has to get, you know, some rounds through it before it's really going to operate correctly. And colleagues I've spoken with that have this same firearm have kind of reported some of the same things. They also have reported a lot of metal shavings coming off the brass when they're breaking the firearm in. And, you know, people have gone as far as to polish that out, try to make that little notch into more of a ramp. Having said all that, the firearm performed really well, and the more rounds that went through it, the better it seems to be. So I think it's just a basic break-in issue with the firearm. It is extremely accurate. The trigger is really nice. Okay, they advertise this as a 5-pound trigger. Using my scale, Mine came in at right about 4 pounds. And it's a nice clean, you pull, it's a steady pressure and a nice clean break. So the gun performs very well. It has a nice trigger. And as I said, as long as you have the right bullet weight for the gun, you shouldn't have any problems shooting this. Now, I thought I would mention, while we're at it, Kel-Tec makes a carbine that is a perfect partner to go with this. You know, obviously this is the Pmr-30, but they also make the Cmr-30, which is that little 22 Magnum carbine. And if you look at it, it basically looks like, you know, this whole frame, you know, extended and turned into a carbine with a big rail and a adjustable stock on the rear. And it takes the same magazines as the Pmr-30. And you can get a case, I believe a Peak, P-E-A-K case, like a Mountain Peak. They have a custom case that will hold the CMR, the PMR, and a bunch of mags and other stuff too. So if you want to get the whole outfit and carry it together, you can do that. But good performer at the range. Just keep in mind that you need to keep the right kind of ammo for best performance. And if you do that, you shouldn't have any problems with it. So what's it like to carry the Pmr-30 as a carry weapon? Well, once again, this is one of those things that made me hesitant about reviewing it in the first place, because I just didn't see this conceivably as something I could carry because of the size. But a colleague of mine who's very enthusiastic about this firearm convinced me that, you know, I should at least give it a try. And of course, I did. And I've got a few different holsters that this will fit. And a holster that I use a lot for larger firearms is the Crossbreed Super Tuck. And I love them because they're leather and Kydex. It's a very simple but very effective and comfortable design. It has 2 belt clips. And using the Crossbreed Super Tuck, at my normal position, I usually carry around 3 o'clock. The extra length of the barrel was not an issue because it was simply in the holster. And the only thing I could really feel was, because this grip is rather large, I could feel the top of the grip a little against the side of the body, more though, you know, than a Glock 19 or similar weapon. But it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Now, one colleague I know that carries this firearm and is very enthusiastic about it actually carries it in a sticky, because he carries it in the small of his back, which I didn't think that this gun would possibly be able to be carried that way. But, you know, under a couple of shirts, you couldn't even see that he had it. So he actually pulls it off pretty well. So I wouldn't carry this gun in a sticky, just because I only use sticky holsters for much smaller firearms, either something I'm going to put in my pocket, either that, or it's so tiny that I can put it in the waistband and not really worry about retention, because of its, you know, I can keep up with that little small thing that I've got in the waistband. So if you're going to carry this, I think you want something good. You want an Alien Gear, Crossbreed Super Tuck, something like that. A good, I think, Kydex and leather, you know, foam, some kind of combo to where you've got that on-body comfort with some solid, you know, Kydex guidance and protection for the firearm. But either way, carrying this, you know, with a loaded magazine was extremely comfortable. I was very surprised, and so I had to take back that criticism that I had originally put down on this as a carry weapon, because you can do it. And not only have I seen it done, but I've done it myself. So if you're wondering whether it's possible, it's very possible. And not only is it possible, it's possible in comfort. So overall impressions of the Kel-Tec Pmr-30. Well, I think it's safe to say that there are some things that I felt like were going to be automatic negatives that I've kind of changed my mind about. And I'll kind of go over the pros and cons with you here. But on the positive side, the weapon is extremely light. I wasn't prepared for how comfortable this weapon was going to be to carry with a full magazine, especially 30 rounds. But, you know, 22 Magnum just doesn't weigh a lot. It's not like, you know, 9mm or 45 or pretty much any other round, it's very light. So even with 30 rounds in the magazine, it's just very comfortable to carry. Now, while we're talking about the capacity, I do want to mention one thing. This is another concern that has come up, and I've had this verified with a colleague. Now, I don't know if this is something that they're working on, if there's going to be some kind of an aftermarket solution, but a colleague I know that carries this firearm does not keep the magazines fully loaded, and the reason why is because they've experienced issues with the magazines splitting. If you look really closely, you can see this seam in the light, and this person has experienced problems with the magazines splitting along that seam when they're fully loaded. He has not had that problem when the magazines are loaded to around 25. Now, I don't know how widespread of an issue that is, whether it's a very isolated thing, but this is not the first person who has told me that that's a problem with the magazine. Now, I don't know if they're doing something to work on that, redesign it, and there may be something in the aftermarket that's good for this. I'm going to investigate that as well, but keep in mind, if you're talking about the magazines that come with the gun, that is something that I have heard, and I haven't experienced any problems so far myself, but if I do, I will certainly report that so everybody knows. But, so, very light, the ammo's available, like I said. You know, there are certain guns I looked at that I kind of turned my head just because the round was a bit exotic. You know, the 5.7 was that way. You know, I looked at the 5.7, enjoyed the 5.7, but getting ammo for the 5.7 was just about impossible, and so I wasn't real thrilled about that. Thankfully, there are companies like, you know, CCI that are keeping up, and there are other companies that I see ammo available too for 22 mag, but CCI has done a good job of keeping up and keeping it out there in the market where we can buy it. So that's good. And of course, you've got the power of a 22 Magnum cartridge and 30 rounds of it in a compact package. So the only negatives I can see, of course, I've heard stories about the magazines. Haven't experienced it yet myself, but it's something to keep in mind. This larger grip, for people with smaller hands, this might be a problem. And even with the right ammo, it seems to have a bit of a break-in period, you know, before it's going to run flawlessly. I haven't had any issues myself, but I have noticed the buildup of, you know, debris when you fire the weapon, the brass shavings and that type of thing. You know, so overall, I don't think there's a lot of negatives, not near as what I would have thought when I picked it up after everything that I had heard. Like I said, I've also heard about some quality issues with the firearm itself. Well, aside from, you know, the fact that someone may or may not like the design, you know, the two-piece screwed together design, as far as quality, the weapon seems to work just fine. So if you are looking for something to be a high capacity option that you can carry, you know, either as a self-defense weapon, a home defense weapon, or whatever specialty type of firearm you're looking for, 22 Magnum is a very good cartridge. It is something that you can get, and with a 30 round capacity, this could be a good all-around contender for you to have in your arsenal. So I definitely had to change my mind about some of the negatives. All right, well, that's going to do it for today. We appreciate you watching as always once again. We're going to be back very soon with another video. So until then, as always, everybody stay safe and have a great day. Thank you very much.